Welcome to Charming Whisper on the ASMR podcast. This week, I will be taking you back in time in a tale entitled Mississippi Mischief. Buck and Ron, two lifelong pals, found themselves in the rolling hills of Mississippi during the 1880s. They were the kind of friends that could get into a mess of trouble just as easily as they could get out of it. The sun was setting, and it painted the sky with hues of orange and pink as they stood by the banks of the mighty Mississippi River, a sight as pretty as a picture postcard. Now, Buck was the tall one, all bones and angles, and he had a drawl as slow as molasses on a winter's day. Ron, on the other hand, was a stout fellow with a quick wit that matched the spark in his eye. They made quite the pair, and the town folks knew that wherever you found one, the other wasn't far behind. One fine day, the two of them were sitting by the riverbank, chewing on blades of grass and watching the steamboats chug along. Their eyes were locked on the biggest steamboat in sight, the SS Magnolia Belle, a beauty that could put a rose to shame. Buck turned to Ron and said, "You know, Ron, I've always wanted to take a ride on that there boat. It's like a dream come true just to think about it." Ron scratched his head, his eyes twinkling with mischief. "Well, Buck, I reckon there ain't no harm in dreaming. But what if I told you that dream could come true today?" Buck squinted at his friend. "Ron, you've got that look in your eye, and it usually spells trouble." Ron grinned wider than a catfish swallowing a minnow. "Trouble, you say? Nah, it's just a bit of harmless fun. What if we hitch ourselves a free ride on that Magnolia Belle?" Buck raised an eyebrow, his curiosity piqued. "Now, Ron, you're talking crazy. How are we going to manage that?" Ron leaned in, his voice hushed like a secret. "Buck, old buddy, I heard tell that the captain owes old Jim Johnson, the fishmonger, a favor. Now, what if we dress up as Jim and his cousin Bob, who's visiting from out of town? We could load some crates on board and act busy as bees. By the time they figure us out, we'll be halfway down the river, and it'll be too late for 'em to turn back." Buck scratched his chin, considering the plan. "Well, I reckon it just might work, Ron, but we better not dawdle. We don't want Jim and his cousin Bob showing up and ruining our scheme." And so the two friends set to work, scrounging up some old crates and a couple of straw hats. Ron fashioned a fake beard out of cotton and glue, and they both practiced their best Jim and Bob impersonations. Buck threw on an apron, and Ron carried a crate of fish as if his life depended on it. With their disguises in place, they ambled up to the Magnolia Belle, where the crew was busy loading supplies. The captain, a portly fellow with a bushy beard, eyed them with suspicion. "Who are you two?" he barked. Buck, in his best Jim Johnson voice, replied, "Well, Cap'n, we're Jim Johnson and his cousin Bob, here to deliver this fine batch of fish to your passengers. We don't want 'em going hungry now, do we?" The captain scratched his head, not entirely convinced, but he had a schedule to keep. "Well, all right then. Get them crates on board quick and don't dilly-dally." With that, Buck and Ron loaded the crates, and before they knew it, the Magnolia Belle's mighty engines roared to life. They were chugging down the Mississippi, the wind in their hair, and the river stretching out before them like an endless adventure. As the sun set and the steamboat's whistle blew, the two friends leaned on the rail, watching the world go by. Buck turned to Ron and said, "Ron, I can't believe we pulled this off. It's like something out of a storybook." Ron chuckled, a glint in his eye. "Buck, sometimes you gotta make your own stories. And this one, well, it's gonna be one for the ages." And there, on the mighty Mississippi, with the stars shining down on their adventure, Buck and Ron shared a good-natured laugh that echoed across the river like a riverboat's calliope. It was a day they'd remember for a lifetime, a day when two friends, with a little mischief Mischief and a whole lot of heart, set sail on a grand adventure, bound for who knows where, but ready for whatever the river might bring their way. Now, as the Magnolia Belle chugged along, Buck and Ron couldn't resist a peek around the steamboat. They soon discovered that they were not the only ones who had a knack for a little mischief. A group of riverboat gamblers had set up a lively poker game on the deck. The stakes were high, and the players were deep into the game, cigars smoldering and cards flying. Ron nudged Buck and whispered, "Buck, old buddy, we've got a plan that's even better than a free ride. What if we win a fortune from these riverboat gamblers and walk away like high-rolling gentlemen?" Buck grinned, always ready for a bit of high-stakes adventure. "Ron, you've got a mind like a fox, but we'll need a strategy. You see, these gamblers aren't your everyday folks." Ron nodded in agreement and hatched a cunning plan. They decided to approach the poker table and play their cards right, both literally and figuratively. They joined the poker game, and as the night wore on, Buck and Ron played their hands with the finesse of riverboat professionals. It seemed luck was on their side, and they began to win hand after hand. As the stakes climbed higher and higher, the tension on the deck was palpable. The riverboat gamblers, who had thought they had found an easy mark, were now sweating beads of worry. Buck and Ron, disguised as the fishmonger and his cousin, played it cool, even though their hearts were racing as fast as a steam engine. At the final hand, the pot was bursting with money, and the riverboat gamblers had only one thing on their minds: to outwit these two newcomers. But Buck and Ron had an ace up their sleeves. Buck laid down his cards with a sly grin. "Royal flush," he declared. The riverboat gamblers stared in disbelief. Ron, with a twinkle in his eye, added, "And I've got a straight flush." The riverboat gamblers, with no better hands to show, begrudgingly handed over the winnings, and Buck and Ron raked in a fortune. As they left the poker table, their pockets bulging with their winnings, Ron couldn't help but chuckle. "Buck, old buddy, this is a tale we'll be telling for generations." Buck tipped his hat and said, "Ron, you've got a mind for mischief, but sometimes mischief pays." And so, under the stars and the twinkling lights of the Magnolia Belle, Buck and Ron continued their journey down the Mississippi River, not just as stowaways, but as riverboat gamblers who had outsmarted the best in the business. It was an adventure filled with hijinks, laughter, and a little bit of good-natured swindling. The kind of tale that would be passed down through the years, told around campfires and dinner tables, and cherished as one of the grandest adventures two friends ever embarked upon. It has been a pleasure talking to you again, and I look forward until the next time we meet.